What you do right before you fall asleep reveals more about your mind than you think, because there is a very specific moment in the day where everything becomes quieter, more honest, more exposed, and that's exactly where some people choose to do something that seems simple, but isn't. They pray. This is not just a religious habit. It's a psychological pattern, a behavior that, when you look closely, exposes how a person processes their day, how they deal with emotions, and how they prepare their mind for rest. Because before sleep, the brain is no longer in defense mode and it shifts into integration mode. Everything you experienced, everything you felt, everything you avoided during the day starts reorganizing itself. And in that moment, prayer is not just talking to God. It's organizing internal chaos. It's putting words where there was confusion. It's giving meaning to what still feels unresolved. And that directly affects how you sleep. Because a mind that goes to bed without processing doesn't rest, it just shuts down temporarily. But a mind that aligns itself before sleep enters a completely different state, more stable, more clear, lighter. And here's where something interesting happens. Not everyone who prays does it from deep faith. Some do it from emotional necessity, from a need to release control, from the pressure of things they couldn't fix. And that doesn't make it weaker. It makes it more human, because in that moment prayer becomes a bridge between what you don't understand and what you choose to trust. And that bridge changes the way you sleep. But it also reveals something deeper. People who pray before bed are not just ending their day. They are redefining how they interpret it. And that raises a question most people never stop to ask. Are you sleeping to rest? Or are you sleeping while still carrying everything you never resolved? There is a quiet difference between people who pray before bed and those who simply distract themselves until they fall asleep. Because while some face their thoughts, others avoid them. And that changes everything about the mental state you carry into the night. Distraction numbs the mind, but it doesn't organize it. It helps you forget for a moment, but it doesn't process anything. And what is not processed does not disappear. It accumulates, slowly, silently. And this is where prayer plays a role most people don't fully understand. Because it's not just repeating words, it's confronting what's happening inside you without filters. It's the moment where there are no masks, no performance, no external noise to hide behind. Just you, and what you're actually feeling. And that is uncomfortable for many people, because it forces honesty. It exposes fears you ignored during the day. It brings back thoughts you tried to push away. But at the same time, it does something powerful. It prevents emotional buildup. It releases tension before it turns into something heavier. It gives your mind a place to unload. And that changes the quality of your rest. Because sleep is not just physical recovery. It's mental recalibration. And if your mind is overloaded, your rest will reflect that. This is why two people can sleep the same number of hours and wake up feeling completely different. One rested, the other drained. Not because of time, but because of what they carried into the night. And that leads to a deeper realization. The way you close your day determines how your mind recovers. Which raises a direct question. Are you ending your day with clarity? Or are you escaping from it until your body forces you to stop? There is something most people never notice about nighttime prayer. It reveals what you truly believe you can control. Because during the day you operate with action. You solve, decide, react, adjust. You feel like you're in control. But when the day ends, control fades. There's nothing left to fix, nothing left to change in that moment. And that's when the mind faces a choice. Hold on or release. People who don't pray often try to keep control mentally. They replay conversations, rethink decisions, imagine different outcomes. Their mind keeps working even when the body is ready to rest. But people who pray are doing something different. They are consciously transferring what they cannot control anymore, not because everything is resolved, but because they understand that not everything depends on them. And psychologically, that changes everything. Because the human mind is not designed to carry unresolved pressure indefinitely. It needs a release point. Prayer becomes that release. It's not passive, it's intentional surrender. And surrender is one of the hardest mental actions for a person to take, because it requires trust without immediate proof. It requires letting go without seeing the outcome yet, and that's why many avoid it. Because holding on feels like control, even when it's exhausting. But letting go feels uncertain, even when it's necessary. And this is where a deeper pattern appears. People who pray regularly before sleep tend to develop a different relationship with uncertainty. They don't eliminate it, but they don't let it dominate their mind. They learn to pause the need to solve everything immediately, and that creates space. Space for the mind to reset, space for clarity to return the next day. And that leads to a powerful question. Are you trying to solve everything before you sleep? Or are you allowing your mind to rest without needing immediate answers? Another layer of nighttime prayer reveals something even more subtle. How a person processes guilt and internal conflict, because every day carries small failures, unspoken regrets, moments that didn't align with who you want to be, and most people don't deal with them directly. They suppress them, justify them, or distract themselves from thinking about them. But suppression doesn't remove guilt, it buries it, and what is buried doesn't disappear. It leaks into thoughts, into emotions, into behavior. Over time, it builds pressure. This is why some people feel restless at night without knowing exactly why. Their mind is not just tired, it's unsettled. But prayer interrupts that pattern. It creates a moment of acknowledgement, a moment where you stop running from what you already know happened, and instead of hiding it, you bring it into awareness. That doesn't weaken a person, it strengthens internal alignment. Because when you acknowledge something honestly, you reduce its hidden power over you. And this is where something important happens. Prayer allows a person to process guilt without being consumed by it. It shifts the focus from condemnation to correction, from carrying the weight to releasing it with intention. And that changes how the mind resets overnight, because a mind that carries unresolved guilt stays tense, even in sleep. But a mind that confronts it and releases it enters rest differently, lighter, clearer, more stable. And over time, this creates a pattern. People who consistently pray before bed develop a stronger internal feedback system. They become more aware of their actions, not because of fear, but because they are used to reflecting. And reflection leads to adjustment, and adjustment leads to growth, which raises a deeper question. Are you ignoring what needs to be confronted? Or are you giving your mind the space to process and realign before it becomes heavier? There is another hidden layer behind nighttime prayer. It shapes how a person relates to fear, because fear doesn't usually appear in the middle of a busy day. It shows up in silence, when distractions fade, when movement stops, when the mind finally has space to think. That's when worries become louder. Uncertainty about the future, things that feel out of control, possibilities that haven't even happened yet. All of it starts surfacing. And most people respond in one of two ways. They either avoid it, or they get trapped in it. Avoidance looks like distraction, scrolling, watching, filling the silence with noise. Being trapped looks like overthinking, imagining scenarios, creating problems that don't yet exist. But prayer introduces a third response, confrontation with direction. Instead of ignoring fear or amplifying it, prayer gives it a place to be processed. It brings fear into awareness, but doesn't leave it there. It redirects it. And psychologically that's powerful, because fear grows in isolation, but weakens when it is named, structured, and released. When someone prays, they are not pretending fear doesn't exist. They are refusing to let it remain undefined. They give it form, they give it words, and then they place it somewhere beyond themselves. And that changes the intensity, because an undefined fear feels bigger than it actually is. But once it is expressed, it becomes something the mind can handle. Over time, this builds a different mental pattern. People who pray regularly before sleep are not free from fear, but they are less controlled by it. They learn to face it without being consumed by it. And that creates emotional stability. Not because life becomes predictable, but because their response becomes consistent. And that leads to a deeper realization. The goal is not to eliminate fear. It's to stop letting it dictate your internal state, which raises a question you can't ignore. Are you escaping your fears at night? Or are you facing them in a way that actually reduces their power over you? Then there is something even more subtle, but equally powerful. Nighttime prayer shapes identity, not in a loud, visible way, but in a quiet, repeated pattern that slowly defines how a person sees themselves. Because every time you pray before sleep, you are reinforcing a certain internal narrative. You are reminding yourself of what matters, what you value, what you believe is worth holding on to. And repetition creates identity, not through one moment, but through consistency over time. People who don't have this moment of reflection often drift. Their identity becomes reactive, shaped by what happened during the day, by what others said, by how they felt in the moment. It changes depending on the environment, but prayer interrupts that drift. It creates a fixed point, a moment where you step outside of everything that influenced you and realign with something stable. And psychologically, that builds internal coherence, because identity is not just about who you say you are, it's about what you repeatedly reinforce in your mind. And when that reinforcement happens every night, something shifts. Your decisions start aligning with that identity. Your reactions become more consistent. Your priorities become clearer, not because you are forcing yourself, but because your mind has been trained to return to the same reference point. And this is where many underestimate the power of small repeated actions. They think identity is built through big changes, but in reality, it's built through quiet repetition. And nighttime prayer is exactly that. A daily reset, a daily reminder, a daily alignment. And over time, that compounds into something strong, something stable, something that doesn't shift easily under pressure. And that leads to a powerful question. Are you allowing your identity to be shaped by whatever happens during your day, or are you intentionally reinforcing who you are before your mind goes to rest? Over time, a consistent pattern begins to emerge in people who pray before sleeping. They develop emotional regulation that doesn't depend on external conditions. This is not about suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine. It's about learning how to process emotions before they take control of the next day. Because one of the biggest psychological problems most people face is emotional carryover. What you don't resolve today, you carry into tomorrow, and that accumulation creates instability. A small frustration becomes irritability. A moment of sadness becomes heaviness. A simple worry becomes constant anxiety. But when someone takes time to pause and reflect before sleeping, something different happens. They interrupt that accumulation cycle. They give emotions a place to be acknowledged, processed, and released. And that directly impacts how they wake up. Because the emotional state you wake up with is rarely random. It's usually the result of what you carried into sleep. And this is where prayer becomes a tool of regulation, not because it removes all emotions, but because it prevents them from stacking uncontrollably. It introduces awareness. It creates space between feeling and reaction. And that space is where stability is built. Without it, people react automatically. With it, they respond intentionally. Over time, this builds resilience, not the kind that ignores difficulty, but the kind that absorbs it without breaking. And that is a critical psychological advantage, because life does not become easier, but the internal response becomes stronger. And that changes everything, because when your emotional state is stable, your decisions improve, your clarity sharpens, your reactions slow down. And all of that begins with how you close your day, which leads to a direct question. Are you allowing your emotions to carry over into the next day? Or are you intentionally processing them before they define your tomorrow? Another important shift happens at a cognitive level. The way people who pray before sleeping handle overthinking begins to change. Because overthinking is not just thinking too much, it's thinking without resolution. It's a loop, the same thoughts repeating, without progress, without clarity, without an end point. And most people try to escape that loop through distraction. But distraction doesn't break the loop, and it pauses it. And as soon as silence returns, the thoughts come back stronger. Prayer, however, introduces structure into that mental loop. It gives thoughts a direction, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Instead of thoughts moving randomly, they are organized into something intentional. And that changes how the brain processes them, because the mind is designed to seek closure. When it doesn't find it, it keeps cycling. But when thoughts are expressed clearly and released, the brain recognizes a form of completion, and that allows it to disengage. This is why people who pray often report feeling mentally lighter, even if their external problems haven't changed, because the issue was not always the problem itself. It was the lack of closure in their thinking. And once closure is introduced, the intensity of the thought decreases. Over time, this builds a new mental habit. Instead of spiraling into overthinking, the mind learns to process and release. It becomes less reactive, less chaotic, more structured, and that leads to better sleep, clearer thinking, and more focused decision-making the next day. But here's the deeper insight. The goal is not to stop thinking. It's to think in a way that leads to resolution. And most people never learn that. They just keep looping. Which raises a powerful question. Are your thoughts leading you toward clarity, or are they keeping you trapped in cycles that never actually resolve? With consistency, another shift becomes visible. People who pray before sleeping begin to develop a stronger sense of internal control over their impulses, not because they become rigid or overly controlled, but because they create a pause between what they feel and what they do. And that pause is one of the most valuable psychological tools a person can have. Most impulsive behavior doesn't come from lack of knowledge. It comes from lack of interruption. The moment appears, the emotion rises, and the action follows immediately. No space, no evaluation, just reaction. But when someone ends their day in reflection and intentional thought, they train their mind to slow down. They become more aware of patterns, what triggers them, what pulls them, what weakens their discipline. And awareness changes behavior, because once you see a pattern clearly, it becomes harder to ignore it the next time it appears. Prayer reinforces that awareness daily. It reminds the mind of what matters, of what should be protected, of what should be avoided. And over time, this creates internal boundaries, not external rules imposed from outside, but internal limits that feel natural to maintain. And this is where self-control becomes sustainable, because it's not forced, it's aligned. The person is no longer fighting themselves constantly. They are operating from a clearer internal structure, and that reduces internal conflict. Decisions become simpler, reactions become more measured, and discipline becomes less exhausting. This is why some people seem consistent even under pressure. They are not relying on willpower alone. They have built a system of awareness and reflection that supports their actions, and that system is reinforced every night, which leads to a deeper question. Are your actions driven by impulse in the moment, or are they guided by patterns you have intentionally trained your mind to follow? When you step back and observe the full pattern, something becomes clear. Praying before sleep is not just a spiritual act, it is a psychological alignment process. It influences how you process emotions, how you handle fear, how you structure your thoughts, how you define your identity, and how you regulate your behavior. And all of this happens in a moment most people overlook. Because the end of the day is not just a closing point, it is a reset point. It determines how your mind recovers, how your emotions stabilize, and how your perspective carries into the next day. People who ignore this moment often wake up already carrying weight they didn't release. But people who use it intentionally wake up differently, not because their life is easier, but because their internal state is more organized. And that organization compounds over time. Day after day, night after night, small moments of reflection build a stronger, clearer, more stable mind. And that stability becomes visible in everything else, in decisions, in reactions, in relationships, in resilience under pressure. But here is the part most people miss. This only works with consistency. One night changes very little, but repeated nights reshape the way the mind operates. And that is where the real transformation happens, not in intensity, but in repetition. Comment below where you're watching from and write Amen if this changed your perspective on the song's lyrics. Subscribe to the channel for more videos. And tell me in the comments what topic you'd like me to cover next.